And now on to introducing today's speaker. Dennis Merritt holds a PhD from Berkeley in insect pathology, specifically microbial control of insect pests. And he has an MA in humanistic psychology from Sonoma State, and he is a certified Jungian analyst, graduate of the C.G. Jung Institute in Zurich. Dennis practices as a Jungian analyst and ecopsychologist in Milwaukee and is a senior member of the C.G. Jung Institute of Chicago. Over 36 years of participation in Lakota Sioux ceremonies has strongly influenced his worldview. Dennis has presented to us over the course of many years on a variety of topics, but always in great depth. Starting back when we were meeting in person when he first presented to us, and it was on ecopsychology. His 2021 lecture to us on his Jungian view of the I Ching is our most watched video on our YouTube channel with over 2,500 views. He authored the 4 volumes of The Dairy Farmer's Guide to the Universe, Jung, Hermes, and Ecopsychology. And now, working with fairy tales has enabled him to develop an archetypal and symbolic perspective that he applies to dream interpretation, cultural issues, and the psychology behind global warming, as referenced in his blog, jungianecopsychology.com. So take it away, Dennis.
Well, thank you, Judy. Good to see you again. And thank you for inviting me to present at the with your Jung Club. I kind of consider the Orange County Jung Group to be my kind of foundation. I spent the first 6 years of my life in Anaheim. That's in Orange County before my parents moved to Wisconsin on a small dairy farm where my mom grew up. That was in 1950. So let me get my share screen here. Can we do that now? Oops.
There it is.
Can you see it?
Yes.
All right. And then I want to go to slideshow, start from the beginning. All right. So I have the rather ambitious title of Cinderella, the Tao, and the Ecopsychology. Like Judy said, this is a 3-hour program, a lot of material. It's a big goal, and I'm going to have to stick fairly closely to my notes, so it's going to be concise and efficient. But hopefully by the end of this presentation and question and answer, you will see what these connections are. Okay. So my best training at the Jung Institute in Zurich was learning how to analyze fairy tales so we could pass one of the big final exams, a 6-hour exam, where you're given a fairy tale that you hadn't seen before, and you had 6 hours to use all the symbol dictionaries you wanted to, and had to have a typed interpretation of it at the end of that time, which was graded by 3 fairy tale experts. So we got together in groups to practice interpreting fairy tales. I took Marion Woodman's place in her fairy tale group. She was finishing up when I got there. And Jim Hollis and I trained at the same time. Some of you will know Jim Hollis. Jim describes our background as old Zurich. And that's pretty much the way I see it as well. So what I want to convey to you today is how we developed that old Zurich, that focus on archetypes and symbols and a symbolic way of looking at dreams, our work with our analyses, and our culture, and especially at this point in time, at our relationship with the environment that I call ecopsychology. So deep ecologists call for the deepest possible understanding of our relationship with the environment, and mostly our dysfunctional relationship with the environment, Because if we don't understand how we got there, we're not going to know how to fix it. And I maintain that Jungian psychology, Jungian ecopsychology, is that best framework for seeing these things. With an archetypal perspective, it's easy to move big pieces around. For example, how the dominant Western religion, Christianity, has contributed in a big way to our dysfunctional relationship with the environment because of the spiritual worldview that we have. So Jung had a great indigenous sense, and he called for modern men and women to try to unite their cultured side with what he called the 2 million-year-old man within. I call that the indigenous one within. This, by the way, is a view of the original, not the original building. It's where we move from the original building in Zurich down to Kusnacht. And that's the garden in front of the building now in Kusnacht. So I relate this 2 million-year-old man to the Chinese sage Lao Tzu's description of the Tao in my favorite translation of the Tao Te Ching by David Hinton. And he says in the glossary of the book, says the philosophy of Tao embodies a cosmology rooted in the most primal and wondrous presence, Earth's mysterious generative force, venerated as the Great Mother. She continuously gives birth to all creation, and like natural processes which she represents, she also takes life and regenerates it in an unending cycle of life, death, and rebirth. The awesome generative force appears most explicitly in Lao Tzu's recurring references to the feminine, the female principle, in a variety of manifestations: mother, female, feminine, yielding, source, origin, etc. It is everywhere in the Tao Te Ching, for it is nothing other than the Tao itself. That'll be the foundation of my talk. So you will hear me coming back to this several times. I'll try to highlight that in my presentation today. So I am deeply concerned about the future for the young people on our planet. And a Bath survey came out a couple of years ago, showed that 40% of them don't want to bring children into the world because of the future they're facing. And over half are depressed and think that our governments and so on are just doing lip service to the environmental issues. And in many ways they are. So I relate this most fundamentally to the main concept I work with from Jung with regard to the environment, and that's his idea of a new age, an age of Aquarius. He coined those two terms in 1940. The label he gave to a paradigm shift he saw coming in the West, that had to come into the West. And my summary of it, that Jung's new age paradigm shift will have an ecological framework. So ecopsychology, I quickly describe that as a study of our dysfunctional relationship with the environment and ways we can address that and connect more deeply to it and in a sacred way. And we'll see elements of that in Cinderella. So I will be presenting what I think Jim Hollis considered to be the secret sauce of Jungian psychology, namely how we develop this archetypal and symbolic perspective. So let's begin with the Jungian master of fairy tales, Louise von Franz. I'll quote some things from her. That is her book, The Interpretation of Fairy Tales. It's an excellent book, by the way. And she says, fairy tales are the purest and simplest expression of collective unconscious psychic processes. They represent the archetypes in their simplest, barest, and most concise form, end of quote. and they tap into the mytho-poetic layers of the psyche. I describe fairy tales as the common person's alchemy. So a fairy tale is like the dream of 10,000 people. It's a message from the collective unconscious to the entire culture's maladaptation. So some cultures have more of a problem with one archetype than another, just like some individuals have more problems with some archetypes than they do with another. And we can think of a fairy tale also as the dream of one person as it's directed by the self. So there's a three-part structure to fairy tales: beginning, middle, and end. So the beginning presents the problem or the concern in symbolic terms. And then the middle presents the complications caused by the problem or what has to be done to solve the problem. And the end offers a solution or a lack of solution to the original problem. And one thing you have to do is check back at the end of the fairy tale to see if it answers the problem presented at the beginning. And we will see that today. Another important concept is that ideas are presented as images in fairy tales, what Freud called primary processes. Images that we then have to translate into psychological language. And of course, Freud would have had a different translation than Jung did. And because we are dealing with archetypal material, there are many possible associations to any archetype. Just like in this Chinese book of wisdom, the I Ching, that goes back to 1050 BCE in its origins, just think of all the millions of Chinese through all the centuries that have been asking this book questions. And there are only 4,096 possible archetypal answers. So one has to learn how to work with those in a symbolic way. Then we use all four of our functions in analyzing fairy tales. So the thinking function reveals the structure of the tale and the connection of the motifs. Feeling gives us a hierarchy value order. Sensation is used to amplify, to fatten up the symbols, and intuition helps us to see the forest for the trees, the one message from the many facets. So it takes me 3 days to work up a fairy tale. And I look up every symbol to reveal the structure of the tale. And these are the main symbol books that I work with. This is the classic. It cost me $100 when I got to Zurich in 1977 to buy this book. I think it's $150 now. It's really good on Northern European mythologies, not very good on myths in other parts of the world, but since this is a Grimm's fairy tale, it's perfect for that. The other symbol dictionary I love is a dictionary of symbols by Jean Chevalier and Alain Gerbrand. It's an excellent book. It has Asian, African, and Native American symbols. And for the American animals, I particularly like Medicine Cards, The Discovery of Power Through the Ways of the Animals by Jamie Sams and David Carson. So it's helpful to think of a symbol or an archetype as a disco ball. And all the mirrors on the surface of the ball are individual presentations to consciousness, which you can think of as light shining on that particular mirror. So any one symbol or big symbols like a snake can maybe have 50 associations or images to it. But what you're looking for when you look at all the different symbols is what particular groups of associations to one symbol go together with all the other particular associations and all the other disco balls. You can think of it as each of those beads on the thread And what is the storyline that brings those particular associations together? And that's something that that emerges as you work with the fairy tale. Even now, when I work with dreams, I've been working with dreams professionally now for 42 years. And I would say about 40%, 30 or 40% of the time when somebody tells me a dream, I have no idea what it's about. But you get in there, you start working with it, get personal associations, and you look at other levels, the cultural, the collective, and so on. And then you put those together with the hypotheses and emerging storyline. And we'll get some practice with that today. So that part, I call this ecological approach to working with dreams because it's about a relationship. How all these individual elements relate to each other. That's, I call, an ecology of the psyche and a psychic approach. And for those of you that have ever tried to put together a film or a video, you know how carefully each image, each sound effect is carefully selected in the music. Everything qualifies everything else in a dream and in a fairy tale. That's another ecological concept. So let's turn our attention now, with that very brief introduction to working with fairy tales, to Cinderella. And much of what I have to present, I got from one of my favorite courses in Zurich. It was a course taught by Catherine Asper. This was in 1982, my last year of training in Zurich, plus subsequent notes that she gave at the great series of lectures in the Philippines. And she published on that, and she noted that there are over 1,000 variants of Cinderella worldwide. This really bespeaks of something very archetypal and fundamental about what's in this fairy tale. So Cinderella deals with the basic human experience of feeling abandoned, valueless, worthless, and unliked because of losing the mothering in us. This can happen when a child loses a mother through death or other causes like being ill and separated from the mother, or by divorce or a catastrophe. And this relates very well to Jung as well. And keep that in mind when you're reading Jung about his relationship with his mother and how that affected him. Kalshed in his latest book on, what did he call it? Gosh, I can't think of it right now. But he thinks that was a lacuna in Jung's theoretical concepts as applied to himself. And that's what Kalshed tries to address in his book in a very, I think, meaningful manner. So we can lose mother energy, become insecure, in other words, at any point in our life. When our mothers die, or when we feel at a loss in a crisis, or a breakup in a relationship, a loss of sense of well-being, loss of one's profession, and so on. And think of all the losses and why there's this deep collective grief, especially in America, because of COVID. So this is how we work a fairy tale. Go through it paragraph by paragraph, line by line, just like we would work a dream. So let's get started. So the first paragraph says, the wife of a rich man fell sick. And as she felt that her end was drawing near, she called her only daughter to her bedside and said, dear child, be good and pious, and then the good God will always protect you, and I will look down on you from heaven and be near you. Thereupon she closed her eyes and departed. Every day the maiden went out to her mother's grave and wept, and she remained pious and good. When winter came, the snow spread a white sheet over the grave, And by the time the spring sun had drawn it off again, the man had taken another wife. I love the way it says, the spring sun had drawn it off again. It's like the sun was removing a blanket from somebody. So one spends most of your time on the first paragraph in a fairy tale because that lays out the problem. And you have to know what the problem is before you have some idea to how to fix it. Remember what I said about deep ecology and the environment. So, and all the basic problem is there in the first phrase. The wife of a rich man fell sick, and then she died. So, first of all, notice how generic this is. No name for a man, for the woman, what country they're in, or anything. In other words, this is timeless. This is archetypal. Just a man and a woman. We're talking about basic life experiences, in Jungian terms, archetypal. The gestalt is excess energy in the masculine realm, and its complement, a sick feminine. That's what this fairy tale is addressing. The woman has only one child, a daughter, so by her dying, the problem gets transferred on to the next generation to solve. Again, thinking of our environment, we're dumping all of our problems onto our kids and grandkids. And that's why I think they really need some framework on how to address that. So Cinderella thus becomes the hero of the story. It is the hero's task to restore a healthy, normal functioning in an individual or in a country where all the egos of the nation have deviated from their instinctual basic pattern of wholeness, pattern that needs to be revamped and adapted to different cultural and historical periods. Cinderella incarnates the healing processes of the self. So an aphorism that I picked up in Zurich, I picked up a lot of one-liners in Zurich. I haven't heard them much since then, but it's this. Mother love is a love you no matter what. Archetypal father love is a love you if you can prove yourself. And we need both. And it's helpful to consider the positive and negative aspects of any archetype or any symbol that you're working with. So positive yang and archetypal energy, I wanted to put this up on the screen because it's so significant. I think it's best expressed by Thomas More's article called The Lost Father. This is one of many things that I give to almost all of my analysans, male and female. I have a list of about 10 things that I hand out, and I've been wanting for years to develop a checklist that I already talked to this analysan about this. So Moore describes father energy as that of direction, authority, understanding, governance, tradition, and protection. It's also a procreativity that enables one to manifest one's unique nature. It gives one personal authority, an inner sense of wisdom, independent thought, and a unique lifestyle. One could add to the list logos, objectivity, and law and order. Then to look at the negative side, those qualities in excess. That is authoritarianism, dominance, overpowering, the stagnation of a rigid structure, defensiveness, and self-serving interest. I think we may have a good archetypal example in our country right now of that at a pretty high level. The old yang, in I Ching terms, excessive yang, is associated with blinding light. In other words, too much light of consciousness, destructiveness, brittleness, and dryness. So let's look then at the archetypal mothering energy. That's associated with caring, sensitivity, compassion, and relational connections. We can talk about this more generically as yin energy. It doesn't have to be male or female, but being born into the body of a woman and living in that, born into the body of a man, living in that, you can see how there's some more natural associations with either yin or yang energy. So yin energy is associated with dark, moist, containing, bringing together, soft, and becoming. If you want to think of it at the most primal level, think of the difference between a phallus and the vulva. So in excess, the yin energy is darkness as chaos and loss of one's way, emotional flooding, passivity, and a smothering containment. So a consideration about the rich man beyond the accumulation of excess yang energy is the materialism of wealth and its association with power. This perspective is borne out by the stepdaughters that we will soon meet, who are beautiful and focused on beautiful clothing, jewelry, etc. The pursuit of money and prestige as a central aim of life often leads to ruthless behavior and a sacrifice of relatedness and eros. So contrary to the commercials that support the consumerism in our culture, which is 90% of the American economy, money beyond a certain level, beyond meeting Maslow level 1, if you will, cannot buy happiness and meaning in life. And that's what the Beatles told us about when they sang, "Can't Buy Me Love." A woman with a rich father complex may not be in touch with her archetypal feminine energy, too much into studies, career, and so on, which is not a problem unless that leads you too much in the so-called archetypal realm and you lose the feminine connection. What traditionally Jungians have called the animus. In a man, Cinderella can be his anima, his inner feminine. So Cinderella's mother is sick and died. So the feminine is more associated with the earth, like hexagram 2, the receptive Mother Earth, the body and matter and groundedness. And by telling Cinderella that she should be good and pious, let me see, did I skip one here? No. By telling Cinderella she should be good and pious, and that she will be looked down upon from heaven, that presents special problems. It's a problem. The problem has been moved into the spiritual realm. Whatever problem the mother had with the overpowering masculine is now gone to the spiritual realm, and that can lead to problems in relating to the body, the dark emotions, and the sexuality. It's like level 3 anima, the feminine raised to a spiritual level. It's not embodied. Whereas in level 4 anima that we don't have too many images for, the Mona Lisa is one, and I think Leonard Cohen's song, Suzanne. So this is the archetypal feminine, the hexagram 2. And here we are with Leonard Cohen. One of my favorite songs. I did an article for that for my master's thesis in humanistic psychology, and it perfectly illustrates how the level 4 anima, as that mysterious woman for a man, is a function of the self. It's like other with a capital O. It's like the face of God for a man. And Cohen sings about that. First, he sings about a woman. Middle stanza, he's singing about Jesus. And then he comes back to singing about a woman. So, like I said, that illustrates that concept. So we can think of positive yang energy, an archetypal father energy. Like I said, expressed in the lost father. And whoa, hang on here. No, on to the next page here. So Cinderella tried to be pious and good during her mourning process because she visited her mother's grave every day and wept, but that didn't lead to a better period. She entered a psychic period metaphorically described as winter, cold, dead, frozen, without feelings. This is the depressive state of not even being able to feel, of feeling petrified. Osper reminds us that, quote, grieving and mourning include a state of numbness, then a state of searching and longing, then a separation period where a real full mourning takes you out of life again. But if the mourning process is stopped or unfinished, it remains unfinished business, end of quote. Oh, the psyche freezes, end of quote. One may go on living, but the depression may last a long time, especially if there has been early bereavement. So Cinderella suffered an emotional abandonment from her absent father, who did not help her mourn. And Osper says, feelings want or need to be shared in order to enable them to come into existence, to belong to us, end of quote. The psychic winter, the snow on the mother's grave, is a symbol of an unfinished process that leads the psyche into depression, hardship, and into the ashes. And to the stepmother with the two nasty stepsisters. Think of that as two sides of the same person. So let's take an objective look at a situation of there being a sick mother in the family. So this can cause a child to grow up too early to become a parent. It can lead to a wounded or a shaky ego self-axis, leading to a narcissistic disturbance and a negative mother complex. And the child can feel insecure and not protected. So subjectively, there will be difficulties in mothering yourself. An abandonment complex, no mother to model for you, and a spiritualized or idealized mother mentioned before that leaves out the dark side, emotions, and the body. A child can think of itself as bad as well if the mother dies. They will look for excuses to blame themselves for the mother's death. And for our youth therapists that have worked for a while will have seen this in your clients. So another mother complex can arise with a narcissistically wounded mother where the child is there to mirror the mother instead of vice versa. So the child then, can be treated as a confidant to the mother, who may share marital or financial distresses and information with the child. And that's overburdening for a child to work with. And again, I'm sure that you therapists have all had people like this in your practice. So what happens next, the new development in the spring of the fairy tale, is that the man takes another wife. So we read, there's the snow of winter, the deadly period, the psychic freeze, if you will. And here's what happened. The woman had brought with her into the house two daughters who were beautiful and fair of face, but vile and black of heart. Now began a bad time for the poor stepchild. Is the stupid goose to sit in the parlor with us? They said. He who wants to eat bread must earn it. Out with a kitchen wench. They took her pretty clothes away from her, put an old gray bedgown on her, and gave her wooden shoes. Just look at the proud princess, how decked out she is, they cried and laughed and led her into the kitchen. So the second wife indicates a change in the father's world in relationship to the feminine and a split in the feminine. It's now about surface beauty, vanity, wealth, and appearance, and materialism as presented by the mother and her daughters. There's no heart, no eros, no relatedness. As a story of an individual, the surface beauty of the stepsisters covers up the emptiness and the buried grief represented within by Cinderella. So our heroine, Cinderella, bears the tension of the split between the all-good goddess and the witch. The punishing negative inner mother makes one unable to love oneself, to see one's own beauty and talents, as the beauty in life has been taken away. The exhibitionist side is inhibited, and we feel isolated. An inner voice of the mothers and sisters that tells us that we are ugly and stupid. So Cinderella, there she had to do hard work from morning till night, get up before daybreak, carry water, light fires, cook and wash. Besides this, the sisters did her every imaginable injury. They mocked her and emptied her peas and lentils into the ashes so that she was forced to sit and pick them out again. In the evening, when she had worked till she was weary, she had no bed to go to, but had to sleep by the hearth in the cinders. And on that account, she always looked dusty and dirty. They called her Cinderella. Now imagine if you had a dream like this. Feel your way into this paragraph that I just read. So as the kitchen wench, Cinderella had to do all the hard work of preparing the food. She could not eat it. The drudge work from day to night is like workaholics. That's one way you can cover up an underlying despair. They can never enjoy the success of the work. Like for Cinderella, the work of preparing all that food for somebody else. A workaholic always has to rush on to the next project. Life becomes a grind and a drag. So with the archetypal nourishing side of the great mother poisoned, psychologically nourishing and mothering oneself is a pain. Throwing the peas and the lentils that you have prepared into the ashes is a form of self-sabotage. The symbol dictionary describes lentils, and so here we look at the individual symbolic dimension of lentils. They were associated with cattle food and were food for poor people. The pea is described in the symbol dictionary as, this is in the De Vries Symbol Dictionary, sacred to the Irish great goddess Ein, who planted them at night when her son complained of the barrenness of the soil. 2, love, a lucky gift among lovers. 3, respect. So throwing peas and lentils into the ashes would be a denigration of these associations. So the psychic work then is for the ego self to discriminate the ego self from the complexes, to bring to consciousness the feelings and thoughts that are within. Cinderella would have to do the difficult work to catch those inner thoughts about feeling stupid and ugly, and fight the outer and inner voices of the stepmother and stepsisters associated with feeling and being unloved. But her incomplete grief process has left her in a state of despair and mute endurance that we call depression. She endures the shame associated with the sense that she is nothing, that she is worthless. People self-sabotage, set themselves up to fail, and keep proving to themselves that they're worthless. Picking little things out of the ashes day after day, and it leading to nothing, is an expression of being utterly lost, of having no perspective or feeling about anything, that you can change anything. This is how it feels to be in the narrow world of depression, of brooding over and over again with thoughts about something you have done or how you have been wronged. This is amplified in Cinderella by having no bed to go to in the evening. She sleeps in the ashes in the hearth. So the hearth, this is from the frieze again, is described as 1, home, altar for the gods; 2, love, fertility, life; 3, the most sacred place in the home; and 4, hospitality and sanctuary. And in folklore, the bride was first led to the hearth of her new home. For Cinderella, all these things are in ruin, in the ashes. In the narrow world of depression, sleeping in a world of ashes is like sleeping or being surrounded by the guilt of all the wrongs that you've done in your life. We have an awful negative image of ourselves that we can't seem to escape. The child with a witch mother is bewitched, cut off from others and isolated. It was never looked upon in a friendly, accepting way, leading to seeing ourselves that way in later life. A person with a negative mother complex can't accept things coming from themselves, including dreams. Their access to the unconscious is difficult. So I consider the Grimm's version of the fairy tale to be the most important fairy tale on the planet for this reason. Attachment theories have made a strong case that love is the most important human experience. And indeed, it is now the core of psychological systems and has always been the core of our religious systems. Cinderella is about being abandoned, unloved, and unlovable, and as a consequence, unable to love. Love can't be preached into a person, as Winnicott has pointed out. It has to be experienced. Grimm's Cinderella highlights the rather unique Jungian concept in the world of psychology that love can be engendered from the archetypal realm as part of human nature, akin to Lao Tzu's idea of the Tao being the source of the 10,000 things, the realm of the mothers, as Jung liked to call it, the deeper levels of the collective unconscious and the functioning of the transcendent function to send us these healing images. So a psychological construct for Cinderella's mother would be that of a narcissistic parent. And for a narcissistic parent, the child is there to mirror the mother instead of the other way around. It's the mother mirroring of the child's natural abilities and the love that the child feels from the mother. That's what gives them the inner sense of being loved in a secure base. But with a narcissistic parent, it's reversed. So the child never has that sense. One of the best books to describe this, and I've recommended it to several analysts with narcissistic parents, is Alice Miller's book, The Drama of the Gifted Child. Very concise, and I've had some analysts that was their main therapy, to read that book and reflect on it and see how it applied to their lives. One of the best examples of how powerful attachment theory is and what it means is something you can see on YouTube. It's a video called Still Face, and it's an experiment by Dr. Edward Tronick. And it illustrates the devastating effect of a child not being mirrored by the mother. Simply stated, you show is a video of this mother relating to her child, and the child is smiling, and the mother smiled, and the baby points, and the mother looked where the baby points, and so on. Mother goes out of the room, comes back with a still face, and that's her face looking at the child. Child smiles, no response to the mother. Baby points, mother doesn't look. And within a few minutes, the baby's reduced to tears and can't look at the mother. That is foundational attachment theory ideas. So let me see, where did I just, okay. So what it feels to look like within the diagnostic narcissistic diagnosis is best described in the fairy tale Snow White. So in that fairy tale, if you remember, the queen went to the mirror every day and said, mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all? And as soon as that mirror said she was no longer the most beautiful, that her daughter was, what happens is she sets out to kill her daughter. And eventually the daughter eats an apple poisoned by the mother. This is what it feels like psychically to live with the inner witch, with the narcissistic mother, or a narcissistic archetypal mother, if you will, negative side of the yin energy. So Jungians have been dealing with narcissism before it kind of became a diagnostic fad several years ago. We've been dealing with it by working with dreams at these archetypal levels and relating it to these archetypal stories. So up to this point in our fairy tale, Cinderella has just endured, has not spoken, she's in the ashes. And Osper suggests that the stepsister of the Cinderella complex still can go out in society and not be totally isolated. The mother can still take care of her children, but she's encapsulated and mute within, and the child can feel that. So Cinderella in the ashes also suggests the possibility of Phoenix rising from the ashes. And this is hinted at in the next paragraph in the story. It happened that the father was once going to the fair, and he asked his two stepdaughters what he thought he should bring back for them. Beautiful dresses, said one. Pearls and jewels, said the second. And you, Cinderella, what would you have? Father, break off for me the first branch which knocks against your hat on your way home. So he brought beautiful dresses, pearls, and jewels for his two stepsisters. And on the way home, as he was riding through a green thicket, a hazel twig brushed against him and knocked off his hat. Then he broke off the branch and took it with him. When he reached home, he gave his stepdaughters the things which they had wished for, and to Cinderella he gave the branch from the hazel bush. Cinderella thanked him, went to her mother's grave, and planted the branch on it, and wept and prayed. And a little white bird always came on the tree, and if Cinderella expressed a wish, the bird threw down to her what she wished for. So, Let's analyze this in a Jungian way. It happened that the father was once going to a fair, some timeless element here. Note again the generic aspect of it. No time, place, or event. It happened. This means that the psyche moves on its own accord. A fair, a festival, is a gathering of people and an increase in psychic energy, new input from an outside source. Outside sources and an expanded horizon, transitions, something special and beyond the daily routine. Growing up in rural Wisconsin, the county fair was always kind of, it was like the circus came to town. There's always the fat lady and the freak and those sorts of things. And I can remember, and then had all these rides and the men working on it. They'd travel all over the country, and you realize they were not your farm neighbors from your farm, So it's that liminal space that we're talking about here, Hermes space, in other words. So let me see. Where am I here? So the note that it's the father that's going to the fair. This is the father in Cinderella's psyche that associated with yang energy. That's more outgoing and out into the world, active and more spreading out. This is an opening to new possibilities because something hooks you, something happens, or you decide you just had enough of it. You may start to read books, go into analysis, change jobs, and so on. Nosper said the cause can come from the outside, but it needs a psychic side that is open to it. So the movement comes from the father complex in Cinderella to take a step out of the depression, out of the bottleneck situation. The father energy gives a direction, the psyche is ready to follow. So the cure for neurosis begins when an individual begins to express themselves. The mundane yet perfectly valid stepsister fantasy wish is to be somebody with prestige and material well-being. That's valid. This is giving validity to yourself or a rejected part of yourself. But the deeper wish is to live, to be one's true self, and the sense, I think, of Winnicott, as symbolized by a wish for greenness, a green shoot that can take root and grow. Unless the psyche can have such a wish, not much can be done in therapy. Jungian analysts then try to awaken or consolidate that wish in their analyses to change and to grow. And as a therapist, you're looking for that first small step that the analysand can take towards growth. So Cinderella's wish is most unusual. Imagine asking for something that brushes against your father's hat. What the heck is that about? It's like at some deep level, the psyche knows where the problem is in the worldview that is represented by her father. Something that must be disrupted, knocked off for something new to develop. In English, we say, "What hat do you wear?" And hats are associated with particular occupations and professions, levels of prestige and power. The thing of the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, a baker's hat, a judge's wig, a bishop's mitre. We could also say, what are your collective value systems, your persona value systems of social status? Or what uniform do you wear? What executive case do you carry? What IDs do you have in your wallet, in your purse or your wallet? Another form is having a list of so many things and responsibilities to do or to meet, you never have any space for any inner development. The hat must be knocked off for something else to come in. This is what Leonard Cohen sang about. He sang, "Ring the bells that can still ring. Forget your perfect offering. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in." Just love Leonard Cohen. My Zurich Swiss analyst, she and I were big lovers of Leonard Cohen. And she had me over for tea and and oranges that came all the way from China. Tea and mandarin oranges when I finished my exams at the Jung Institute. That was from Suzanne. So as Cinderella is hoping for an accident, a synchronicity, the intervention, in other words, of the gods to disrupt a worldview or a collective attitude. At the deepest level, one can imagine a fairy tale as a story about a profound shift in an archetype defined as a historical dominant, which we, so many are calling the patriarchy, and not only in the West. One attribute that Jung had of the 5 that I was able to detect in how he described the New Age is that there would be a rise in archetypal feminine energy. If you're not connected to the unconscious, that is the source of the irrational, of something new. The Tao, as mother, as Lao Tzu described it, the source of the 10,000 things, and the unconscious support for what emerges from the unconscious, a person and a culture. If you don't have that support, you're going to more be readily available and susceptible to cultural values, opinions, and attitudes. So the father got his hat knocked off by a hazel twig riding through a green ticket. So let's amplify green. That is associated with regeneration, growth, potential life. Here in Wisconsin, we're still waiting to see some green. It's almost the end of March, even though the calendar said we're past the first day of spring, but it's been kind of a cold, long winter. The heart in Indian chakra system is the color of the heart chakra. I think relatedness here. In the Lucier color test, it's associated with self-assertion. Brucci associates the green with the color of the self, and von Franz says it's the first color after depression. The De Vries Symbol Dictionary describes the thicket as the place where the heart, H-A-R-T, hides. The heart is an adult male deer associated with the morning star Venus, and association with resurrection because it sheds its hide and its horns before regrowing them, and that, therefore, is one of the emblems for Christ's resurrection. It's a symbol of Artemis in Greek mythology. She was the goddess of childbirth and of new beginnings. Artemis was Apollo's sister, and we have the Artemis space shuttle now. You can see with these associations how nature and the human gods and the goddesses are intertwined. So a branch is considered, Jung and Freud used a lot of Latin terms. They were raised in the classic tradition, so they all knew Latin, and it's called pars pro toto, the part representing the whole. Of the many associations to the hazel are its relationship to the great goddess in Celtic mythology, associations to love and fertility, and a counter charm against witches or to attract witches. So there's that archetypal connection with the witch. So notice how these associations describe a subtle turning point in our fairy tale, a storyline about moving toward something different. So Cinderella has planted the hazel twig on her mother's grave and waters them with tears, and that leads to this beautiful tree. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who's written extensively on death and dying, says, tears come with the acceptance of death, which can be very repressed. Often if grief is shared, the which is not projected. So what's happening here, as Osper points out, is Cinderella is working through her biographical issues by going back to where she may have buried too much, where her psyche got stuck and frosted over by the grief when her mother was buried, and so was Cinderella's aliveness. This can happen from a unique crisis with bereavement or with difficult periods in your life. So it may be necessary to go through a stage of absolute darkness without perspective and be removed from the world for a seedling for life and abandonment to emerge. Also for those old forms to completely die off. While enduring a series of catastrophes and hardships from without, a green twig may start to grow within. So let's look at 3 here. It's a dynamic number, and going to the grave 3 times indicates an ongoing process one has to repeat and be faithful to. In our modern times that is so fast-paced, people don't often have time to grieve, vital though that time is. A tree is a great self-symbol. It's rooted in the earth. Think of rooted in country, family, ancestors, biography. It grows slowly but surely. It's strong and it endures. And it extends from below the ground, the unconscious, the roots, to the human domain, the trunk, and it extends into the spiritual realm, the crown of the tree. And we never know what new branches and fruits may emerge from the crown of that tree. So growing out of the mother's grave with Cinderella's tears would be the development of new and uniquely her own type of mothering energy. This is related to what Jung called human nature, or the Taoist philosophy, rooted in that mysterious generative force venerated as the Great Mother, as Lao Tzu described it, that continuously gives birth to all creation and takes life and regenerates it in an unending cycle of life, death, and rebirth. That's from Hinton, page 97. The death and breaking down back to the building blocks of psychic energy can now be reformed into a new, more life-enhancing form. So at the collective level then, I think of the earlier days of the women's movement. I got to Berkeley in the fall of 1967 when the women's movement was emerging. And it wasn't a pleasant time to be a man. You might open a door for a woman and she would scowl at you. And the women dressed more frumpily at that time. And what they were doing, they had to separate from the masculine, talk amongst themselves, as one of those Saturday Night Live skits used to say, get a sense of what it was like to be a woman outside of the presence of a man. And as a biologist, I think of that as how speciation comes about. From the main population, you have to have some population that splits off. It has to be split off long enough for mutations and so on, a different genetic base to develop, so that when the 2 populations come together again, they're not bred out of existence and be reabsorbed into that initial population. So this is an archetypal way to looking at a regeneration. You can look at it like a springtime. You can look at it as in the development of the women's movement. You can look at it biologically as the speciation process. So Cinderella plants the hazel twig, and there, what happens then is oops, I got a little ahead of myself here. So in object relations theory, note, and this is important, and this is what you can get in the Jungian world, note that a significantly new self-image emerged from within by a process of nature. The natural processes of the transcendent function, and it was not an introject from the outside. That's a literalization of this process. So the white bird, the little white bird that always came to the tree, must be considered in the gestalt of the bird and the tree, with the association of the tree as a self symbols. So birds are associated with fantasies, dreams, hope, and intuition. White is associated with peace and the Holy Ghost. It's the activating spirit in the Christian Trinity of Father, God, Son, and Holy Ghost. In other words, getting in touch with the self enables one to begin to imagine, dream, and have hope. So we can consider birds to be what a Native American would call a spirit animal or a medicine animal. And I've come to really appreciate this from my Native American experiences. The traditional Sioux Indian boy, as soon as he hit puberty, was put on the hill, as they called it. 4 days and nights without food and water, the shaman, your family's praying for you. And you hope by stressing the psyche to the max. A dear friend of mine who did several vision quests said, you feel like you're going to die. You stress the psyche to the max with the hope, not the promise, that you will get a vision for your life and or a spirit animal. That by the psyche being reduced to its essence, you get an image of what your essence is. And that's a very unique essence, like a sitting bull buffalo, a dancing horse, a black elk, and so on. Here's black elk. And that is the foundation, your foundation for your life. It's your medicine, spiritually, psychologically, socially, in Jungian terms, is a self-image that you can get in your adolescence. And this is one way I talk to young people about a connection to nature with the idea of the spirit animals, because animals do not live in a vacuum. If your spirit animal is in a bear, that bear evolved to live and survive in a particular environment. So your spirit animal is a natural connection to the land. And as an analyst, one of the things that you really look for, and you have to have a sensitivity to this from your own dream work, is some animal or land form or weather phenomena that in a numinous form that could be like their spirit animal or spirit natural phenomena. And you've got to be able to connect with that and help bring that out and help the analyst know how to develop that. That spirit animal, in those of you familiar with the I Ching, that's like hexagram 1, inspiration. But then hexagram 2 is to be inspired and to manifest that in space and time. And it's a complementary thing. You need both. So Jung, one of the Native American writers and philosophers, Vine Deloria Jr., in his book C.G. Jung and the Sioux Tradition, recognized Jungian psychology as the best Western framework for relating to indigenous cultures. Deloria recognized Jung's indigenous soul beneath his persona of the collected works and everything else, and appreciated the significance in the Jungian world of dreams, symbols, archetypes, synchronicities, and visions. Now, Walt Disney popularized the Frenchman Perrault's telling of fairy tale with the fairy godmother. But you can see how the Grimm's version is much closer to the indigenous and ecopsychological worldview because it helps connect us to the land. Legends and fairy tales are seen as a complement to the dominant cultural motif in our Western culture would be Christianity. So this is how the indigenous soul of the Europeans, if you will, came through in these fairy tales. And again, I see this sense in related to the way David Hinton talked about the Tao. So let's go on to the next step and the next paragraph. Again, it happened, however, that the king gave orders for a festival, which was to last 3 days, and by which all the beautiful young girls in the country were invited, in order that his son may choose himself a bride. When the 2 stepsisters heard this, they too were to appear among the number, and they were delighted, called Cinderella and said, "Comb out our hair for us, brush our shoes, and fashion our buckles, for we are going to the wedding at the king's palace." Cinderella obeyed, but wept, because she too would have liked to go with them to the palace, and she begged her stepmother to allow her to do so. "You go, Cinderella," said she, "covered in dust and dirt as you are, and would go to the festival? You have no clothes and shoes, and yet would dance?" As, however, Cinderella went on asking, the stepmother said at last, "I have emptied a dish of lentils into the ashes for you. If you pick them out again in 2 hours, you shall go with us." The maiden went through the back door into the garden and called, "You tame pigeons, you turtle doves, and all you birds beneath the sky, come and help me to pick the good into the pot, the bad into the crop." So what's going on here? Notice that the masculine yang energy has moved into another dimension, beyond the personal, Cinderella's father, into the archetypal domain of the king archetype. In this case, the old king, because a generational change is coming. The king to be, the prince, needs a mate. We are moved beyond the generic festival to a very focused issue, a festival to find a feminine match for the next generation, a new iteration of male-female relationships, of yin and yang energy. Note that no queen is mentioned. It will be a rerun if one of Cinderella's sisters gets chosen by the prince, right? But new feminine energy has been developing in Cinderella. If there's a strong development in the feminine realm, it will change the masculine-feminine dynamics in the new kingdom. That will be filled by the vacuum left by there being no queen. So what do kings represent? They are the embodiment of the divine principle, the indwelling, a self-image for a culture. It represents dominant values, the king or the ruler in us, the consciousness that underlies all political and religious doctrines of a social group. The king also gives a conception of what how a man should live its life in that culture, personifies the values of a man in that culture. Self symbols age, and the king as the dominant and most central image of the collective unconscious is fully exposed to the changes in the cultures. And it's easy for it to lose its connection with the irrational contact and flow of life and the flow of psychic events from the unconscious, and it can become mechanical and dogmatic. It's like religions, they age as well. And that's how Jung described Christianity. It went from some original sense of wholeness and has been reduced to dogma. and this is my personal take, but from my Jungian perspective, that's the evangelical Christians, this is my political belief, that support Trump are in that state, and the Catholic Church in many ways, in that there's not going to be a woman pope, and they're still wrestling with pedophilia in the Catholic Church. That's my perspective. The idea as well is the king can represent too much an accumulation of power. The saying is power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. No comment in our present political situation. So if the king represents the divine masculine in a culture, logos, collective consciousness, ideal male model, the queen represents the complementary archetypal feminine, the receptive, the eros principle, relatedness to the unconscious, the irrational, the feminine, the role model for a female in the culture. As the anima of the king, it represents the deeper levels of the collective unconscious and a relating to the realities of space and time in the material realm. She's the image for a woman would look like in the culture and for feminine values and feminine beauty in a certain habit or lifestyle, the eros style of how people relate in that culture. So it's not surprising then that only the beautiful women in the kingdom have been invited to the mating game, right? Cinderella's father, as a member of that kingdom, is reflecting the dominant values portrayed by the king, that is shortchange the feminine for the shallow beauty of form. In the I Ching, it's called the hexagram grace. So Cinderella's consciousness, however, has taken a quantum leap. She has a strong desire to go to the celebration, to the festival. It's an extroverted wish to come out and not be bewitched and isolated. The stepsister side would represent the part of the complex that wants to be extroverted and social. This would be, for Cinderella, extracting the gold from that shadow stepsister side. In other words, healthy narcissism. And the desire for that union would come from the spirit, the animus side, but the encapsulated acid side of Cinderella will leave her empty if she goes to the ball. Now she confronts the stepmother for the first time, begs her. She's showing a greater sense of self and agency. And here it's a person who has all the good intentions in the world, but the negative undertow undoes it. That negative mother throws the food, the lentils, into the sea. So I'm going to say just more, and then it'll be time for a break. So sorting out the seeds in the fairy tale, this is an insoluble task. It's beyond the ability of consciousness to accomplish. Given 2 hours to sort those lentils. But 2 is a sign of something coming into consciousness. The 2 motif is amplified by the birds, then that indicates something of a discrimination between the good and the bad seeds, and the ability to discriminate that within oneself, those energies within oneself. Seeds are a sign of fruitfulness, potential growth, and perseverance, and the ability to stick to things. Seeds have to be pretty persevering to come up through the ground and the clods and everything else. So Cinderella can't consciously do that at this point, but what's happening in the unconscious, symbolized by these birds coming in through the back door and from the garden nature. So research has shown us that the unconscious, when we dream, continues to creatively work on things. So let's look then briefly at the pigeon. Here are all the birds coming in, and the pigeon's an interesting bird. It's associated with peace, light, gentleness, tenderness, and wisdom. And the Holy Spirit in the Christianity is related to the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. That's often represented by a dove and seen as a messenger from the beyond. The Virgin Mary is often associated with that, but so is the goddess Aphrodite, the goddess of love, sex, and eros, and sensual beauty. So the constellation of a new spirit is a tremendous change in Cinderella's psyche. She is connecting with the more archetypal, spiritualized dimensions of the energies associated with the doves. And like in big dreams, it lays down the foundation for a fundamentally different way of being in life. So if the dreams can be related to and the energies incarnated into consciousness. And the fact that the pigeons are tame indicate a certain degree of domestication coming closer to human consciousness than to be completely wild or in nature. But the pigeon can be a mean bird, as we'll see later on. So I think this is a good time for a break. We're halfway through, and I'm about halfway through, and I want to be sure that we have some time for your responses and things that you don't understand, because like I say, this is about as a condensed way I can lay out what I think is the archetypal core of Jungian psychology. So Judy, let's take a 10-minute break, and at 20 minutes to the hour, come back again. How's that sound?
That sounds good. It's according to my watch, it's 12:28 in California. So
Really?
so we'll say 12:40 at 20 minutes to the hour. That'll be a 12-minute 12-minute break. Does that
Okay.
sound good?
Whatever clock you're on 10 minutes from now. How's that?
Right.
All right. Let's do that.
Okay. Gonna leave that I could put the maybe I'll put the slideshow up while we're having our break. The slideshow that I run at the beginning.
Okay, that sounds good.
Okay, see you all in 10 minutes.
Shall we start?
Sure.
Gotta turn the volume down. All right, let me go back to screen share. Okay, so I have about an hour of material left. I want to be sure we have time for discussion and questions and critiques and so on. Like I say, this is my most concise way of presenting what Jim Hollis called Old Zurich. There aren't too many of us left. It was a very different time in Zurich, and I talk about the differences in a presentation I gave to the Monterey Friends of Jung. You can look that up on my blog, jungianecopsychology.com. There was a pretty profound shift in the types of people they accepted for training and in elements of the training program that occurred in 1978 when we moved from the original institute in Zurich down to Küsnacht. So back to our story and dealing with the secret sauce of Jungian training here, fairy tale, ability to work with fairy tales. So to the turtle dove. In the De Vries dictionary, it talks about the turtle dove as being emblematic of affection and love. Remember, this is a story about somebody who was deeply wounded in that archetypal domain of love. And the turtle dove represents a man who likes to dance. It is a harbinger of spring, indicating that winter is over and the time for love has come. So by calling all you birds beneath the sky, we're talking about the spiritual archetypal domain that birds represent, the domain of spirit, angels, and supernatural aid. The story continues. Then 2 white pigeons came in by the kitchen window, and afterwards the turtle doves, and at length all the birds beneath the sky came whirring and crowding in, and alighted amongst the ashes. And the doves nodded with their heads and began pick, 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 pick. And the others also began pick, 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 and gathered all the good seeds into the dishes. And before half an hour was over, they had already finished and flew out again. Then the maiden carried the dishes to the stepmother and was delighted and believed that she might now go with them to the wedding. So Tunis, as I said before, the 2 white pigeons came in. That denotes something coming into consciousness. Tunis is being able to distinguish one thing from another. That's minimal level consciousness. So we move from the domain of the domesticated birds, the pigeons, and that's also closer to consciousness, to the something that's close to humans, the turtle doves, but with no number given, meaning a little more generic. Then a transition to the broadest, more general and archetypal of all the birds in the sky. And these are important number symbolisms that analysts track. The kitchen, of course, is the place for the preparation and the blending and transformation of raw materials into tasty and nourishing food, a place also often associated with the feminine Innish nourishing aspect. Now notice the repetition of pick, pick, pick by the birds. When you see any activity in fairy tales or in dreams, enact that if you can, physically. So you must imagine what that activity is like to embody that. So birds, especially pigeons, all birds seem to be, they're quite anxious. In terms of thoughts, I think of the monkey mind they talk about in meditation, but how quickly the birds are able to sort things out with their pecking, how quickly in our storyline, they're able to distinguish between the good and the bad thoughts in Cinderella, in the world that she's living in within her psyche. This is something Cinderella could not do in her depressed state. So things are evolving here. It is difficult, but vitally important to be able to separate these things out, even though it's happening at the unconscious level. But remember, we're only 5 to 10% conscious of the total activity in our psyches. So the birds sorting the seeds in the ashes reminds me of Leonard Cohen's enchanting song, Suzanne. I see that as a level 4 anima, where she shows you where to look amongst the garbage and the flowers. It's important to acknowledge when we need help. This is the state of mind when we're praying or putting a question to the I Ching. It's the mindset of crying for a vision when one is on a vision quest, or for the appearance of spirit animals in a vision quest. Next, we'll see what happens. But the stepmother said, "No, Cinderella, you have no clothes, you cannot dance, you'd only be laughed at." And as Cinderella wept at this, the stepmother said, "If you can pick 2 dishes of lentils out of the ashes for me in 1 hour, you shall go with this." And she thought to herself, that she most certainly cannot do. So Cinderella, though she was crushed by this, she didn't give up. Very important fact here. She tapped into the supporting archetypal source that the stepmother could not imagine. She shows persistence and hard work that's necessary to reach a goal, what Jungians here would call the individuation process. hexagram 2 in the I Ching, manifesting and embodying the inspiration of hexagram 1. So she calls the birds back. They sorted it out in half an hour, metaphorically indicating that the unconscious is becoming more facile in beginning to do this important discrimination. But her delight was crushed when what happens next? The stepmother says, "All this will not help. You can't go with us where you have no clothes and cannot dance. We should be ashamed of you." On this, she turned her back on Cinderella and hurried away with the two proud daughters. So consciousness has been raised, but the internal negative mother is still overpowering. The emphasis on being able to dance is about being in an embodied flow and connection with the animus, or a woman. Jung called the anima and the animus, remember, the archetype of the soul. That's how important these concepts are. So consciousness is stuck in this phase. So we go on to the next phase. We've had 3 things here, now on to the next phase. So after the family left for the ball and no one was at home, Cinderella went to her mother's grave beneath the hazel tree and cried, "Shiver and quiver, little tree, silver and gold throw down for me." Then the bird threw down a silver dress and slippers embroidered with silk and silver. She put on the dress and with all speed went off to the wedding. So notice that Cinderella has obeyed her basic pattern, her complex of "I am not allowed, I am worthless," and goes to the good mother place, the tree, and asks for gold and silver. In adolescence, it's important to disobey the parents, but later in life, it's important to confront and disobey such a complex as Cinderella has. So notice that Cinderella is alone. She does this after the family leaves, so she can tap into that developing self. It's like an artist to me that's trying out some new style, painting style. Think of Rembrandt trying different. You got to do this by yourself. You can't have people coming in and say, "Oh God, that looks pretty weird." So you have to nourish this connection between consciousness and the unconscious, a fertile force, before you can fully show it to the public. But Cinderella is tapping into a developing self. And I love that image of the tree shivering and quivering. It's like the self is so charged up that it's energized and it's shivering and quivering with excitement. So Osper points out the significance of asking for gold and silver instead of jewelry and beautiful dresses, and how far she's come from asking for whatever knocks her father's hat off. It's like asking to be seen in the world for her most indestructible values, her true self, the gold and silver. The more masculine associations with gold are a striving upward, clarity, powerful standpoint, and persistence through difficult situations. Silver, as Osper points out, is about relatedness. Feminine because it reacts to the surroundings, the air, and it can also be tarnished, as any of you know that have silverware. Osper, I quote, "The silver in us is our possibility to react to the world, people, situations, things, to being loved or hated, to be joyful or sad." Notice this is totally different from being totally isolated from the world. That's what silver would represent. Gold and silver would then symbolize a balance and a complementary fit to yin and yang energies, answering the balance of the energies in the opening sentence of the paragraph. It's in the yin yang symbol, the dark spot in the center of light and the light spot in the center of the dark energies. So Cinderella is developing a healthy narcissism and exhibitionism. out of the shadow aspects of the stepsisters. If a dress matches one's inner state and feelings, it's a soul dress and an outward show of inner wealth and beauty, unlike the persona and ego wish of the stepsisters that disguised an emptiness and even a cruelty within. Slippers emphasize the feminine aspect of footwear, silk being associated with beauty and extravagance, and silver underscores the feminine nature of the slippers. The stepsisters had given her wooden shoes, indicating a heavy and impoverished, ill-fitting, and clumsy way of walking through life. Footwear indicates the way we are connected with the ground of our being, with Mother Earth. As a therapist, you can value the client and give them a sense of their value and help them start listening to themselves when the psyche values, when their psyches value them. Cinderella felt valued when the good mother was constellated in her. So we move on. Her stepsisters and stepmother, however, did not know her and thought she must be a foreign princess, for she looked so beautiful in her golden dress. They never once thought of Cinderella and believed that she was sitting at home in the dirt, picking lentils out of the ashes. So in other words, the step family is so trapped in their complexes, they can't see their inner worth. But look what happens next. The prince approached her, took her by the hand, and danced with her. He would dance with no other maiden and never let loose of her hand. And if anyone else came to invite, he said, "This is my partner." So often in fairy tales, a positive animus comes only after a relationship with a positive mother. If the negative mother is still strong, the animus will often be negative, like a robber. So Cinderella at the ball is in touch with the value and soul beauty in herself, and narcissistically displays it to the world. She is alive and in touch with the world, relating to it. That's the silver. This can be a member of the opposite sex, or a friend, a dialogue, walking together, emailing others, affective attunement, and so on. You are really relating when you dance. The dance is being in the dance of life, expressive in the flow and rhythm, movement, and letting go, even letting go to appetites. The dance close to a member of the opposite sex means that you're close to body heat, the sensuality and the power of touch, and skin to skin contact, and pheromones, external hormones that entomologists know all about. So Cinderella, first time, is being mirrored by a human, seen for her inner beauty that she has been developing by being in touch with herself, and seen big time. This is a handsome prince looking for a bride. So in a man, it's about a relationship with his feminine and vice versa for a woman. It can be symbolic of the relationship between the head and the heart, between feelings and thoughts, an inner dance with our thoughts, or an outer relationship with a person. And it's important to have a felt reality behind the thoughts when dealing with things that matter. In psychological theory is empty if the therapist can't fill it out with life experience. Cinderella at the ball is the albedo moment in alchemy, the first light showing forth from the darkness of the negredo. But it's an inflationary moment. An example is a young woman meets a young man she's interested in. He asks her out for a date, and all these thoughts she has about that young man are her animus, her inner masculine, if you will. Of course, that all starts to burst when they go on the first date, but it's that inflationary period, that's the albedo, and that's what we have here at the ball. And notice the motif of threeness. In the archetypal material here, things happen 3 times onto another phase. And one way I think about it, it's like, and I had several of these during my fraternity days in an agricultural fraternity. So you drink too much, you have a hangover. Well, your first hangover, you don't know that may be unique. But then your second hangover you have, oh, so this may not be a one-off, but by the third hangover, you realize that, like Bob Dylan sang about in my all-time favorite album, Desolation Roll, something is happening here, but you don't know what it is. Do you, Mr. Jones? So that's what the threeness represents. Doesn't mean it's over, it means that you've kind of had enough of this, and the minimal amount of times this can happen before you go on to the next phase is 3. But fairy tales, like films, are very efficient. But in waking time, you may just keep on drinking badly for the rest of your life. So look what happens next. She danced till it was evening, and then she wanted to go home. But the king's son said, I will go with you and bear you company, for he wished to see whom the beautiful maiden belonged. She escaped from him, however, and sprang into the pigeon house. The king's son waited until her father came, and then he told him that the unknown maiden had leapt into the pigeon house. The old man thought, can this be Cinderella? And then they had to bring him an axe and a pickaxe that he might hew the pigeon house to pieces, but no one was inside. And when they got home, Cinderella was in her dirty clothes among the ashes, and a dim little oil lamp was burning on the mantelpiece, where Cinderella had jumped quickly down the back of the pigeon house and had run to the little hazel tree, and there she had taken off her beautiful clothes and laid them on the grave. And the bird had taken them away again, and then she seated herself in the kitchen amongst the ashes in her gray gown. Notice that the attitude occurred as evening approached. In other words, as the power of the unconscious began to ascend. And we know what's in Cinderella's unconscious that hasn't fully been dealt with. So we explored the symbolism of the pigeon before, Aphrodite's bird, goddess Eros of love, sensuality, and feminine beauty, and so on. For Cinderella's emerging sense of her feminine energy, to be constricted in that form would have been deadly. Probably the type of energy her beautiful, flirtatious stepsisters would have displayed toward the prince. The pigeon house is on the king's and in the prince's backyard, suggesting that the trap for Cinderella at this archetypal masculine level is in the king's backyard, where the father is a citizen of that kingdom, reflects how she personally experienced the imbalance of the masculine and feminine energy that was stated in the first paragraph. So in level 1 anima terms, this is the feminine as a sex object for the masculine. The pigeon, what the pigeon represents there in Aphrodite. And the deadliness of that for a woman is shown by all of a sudden the father's there. So what would you do if you thought that a child of yours was inside of a little house? To get an axe and axe it to pieces? This is symbolic of how deadly it is for Cinderella to be trapped in that form until more has developed in herself, until her inner feminine energy is stronger. As long as that inner connection to the feminine isn't developed strongly enough, she's going to fit back into the collective values of that culture, which, as we saw in the opening sentence of this fairy tale, is deadly. So what has happened to Cinderella then, ending up back in the ashes? She gets caught back in the witch emotional state. There's a tremendous tension at this point between the dark, negative feelings and the paradisical world that can be lived out and acted in at some time. So in the fairy tale, this happens 3 times, but in life it can go on for 1,000 times. The negative mother complex of despair, negativity, and destructiveness, we can keep falling back into that. The ball was too quick a change for the opposites to be integrated, but the individuation process is underway. It's a dangerous time in therapy, and suicide can be a risk. Person feels, oh my God, this is what it's like. And then boom, they get sucked back in, and that can be overwhelming to a client. So a positive symbol is that dim little oil lamp burning on the mantelpiece when Cinderella got back home from the ball. This is a sign that there's some light, some consciousness and hope coming into Cinderella's life. Light from an oil lamp is soft and mellow, and oil is also a healing light, a healing balm. So day 2 of the festival saw Cinderella getting an even more beautiful address from the bird, and everybody was astonished at her beauty. She is allowing more of a developing inner soul beauty to show. The prince danced with her only as his partner, but again she sprang away from him and nimbly climbed the branches of a beautiful tall tree in the garden behind the house, on which hung the most magnificent pears. So look what happened next. She clambered up so nimbly between the branches like a squirrel that the king's son did not know where she'd gone. He waited until her father came. Uh-oh, there's the father again. And said to him, the unknown maiden has escaped from me, and I believe she has climbed the pear tree. Father thought, can it be Cinderella? And had an axe brought and cut the tree down, but no one was on it. And when they got into the kitchen, Cinderella lay there among the ashes as usual, for she had jumped down on the other side of the tree and taken the beautiful dress to the bird on the hazel tree and put on her gray gown. So the pear has strong associations to femininity because of its shape. We're talking about the nice buttocks of the female that the male of our species is programmed to be irresistibly attracted to. Image from the pear, Aphrodite and the female shape, is seen as the most popular image for GIs in World War II, Betty Grable. Many GIs had this photo pinned beside their beds. Bob Dylan sang about this in Highway 61 Revisited, Desolation Row. Cinderella, she seems so easy. It takes one to know one, she smiles and puts her hands in her back pocket, Betty Davis style. So Dylan presents Cinderella as being easy, an easy lay, promiscuous. Betty Davis, oops, I guess I didn't have a picture of Betty Davis. She was a Hollywood superstar in the 1930s and 40s. But I think, like I said, a better comparison to the pair would be Betty Grable. So the bigger feminine buttocks is because the human female has to have bigger pelvic bones than the male. This is my biological side coming out, because she has to bear the heavy weight of the baby in the womb. There is also a sensuous, exotic dimension to the pair because it is sweet and juicy. So let's think Freudian here. Every man knows what's on the other side of that beautiful butt. So an archetypal motherly dimension enters with the hips and the association with a baby. Well, there's Cinderella, seems so easy. There it is. Got behind in my slide. There's Betty Davis. And this is these archetypal mothering dimension, primitive images of that. The old goddess statues with huge hips and large breasts. And a pair also looks like a bit like a breast and a uterus. It was sacred to Hera, the Greek goddess of marriage and motherhood. So Cinderella would have suffered the same fate as her mother and step sisters had she got trapped in the mother archetype and in the erotic feminine. Notice that these two archetypes are well developed in the king's garden. The pear tree is beautiful and tall, meaning that this pear archetype, that the archetype of the feminine as mother and the trap of that is what we're seeing here. The trap of being how it was so brutally attacked by the father, both the pigeon house and the pear tree. So on the third day of the festival, Cinderella gets an even more splendid and magnificent dress. Astonished everyone to the point they couldn't speak. Well, you realize we're at the apex here. Her slippers were golden, a more precious metal associated with the sun, incorruptibility and immortality. Her inner soul has reached its maximum, and its golden color is showing forth from her new standpoint. Shoes cover the feet. The enthralled prince again claims her as his only partner, but experience has taught him that she's likely to slip away. This is the threeness state, the recognition that something's happening here, but you don't know what it is, but you want to do something about it. So he smeared pitch on the staircase that Cinderella would run down, and one of her slippers got caught on it. King's son picked it up. It was small and dainty and all golden. So this is her third pleading. She still cannot sustain a presentation of her beautiful side to others. She lost her left shoe, the connection to the body and the unconscious. She is still not feeling the link between the body and the self. She has not fully embodied the beautiful self-image. Often in therapy, we have to get creative and show foresight to trick ourselves to become conscious that we're in danger of falling back into the unconscious. It can be a helpful thought, like, I know where this is going to end up if I start down that path, if I take a drink, going back to my hangover analogy here. That's probably not a very good one, but something I was able to relate to personally. So this is the intuitive realm and the domain of Hermes, the archetypal trickster in Greek mythology. The prince capturing Cinderella's shoe is like bringing something into consciousness about that complex, which is a definition of the unconscious, right? It's a complex. A positive relationship is beginning to be established with the masculine side of Cinderella, her animus. So a shoe is a sex symbol. It's the receptacle for the phallic foot that gets inserted into it. This can symbolize the fit between a man and a woman in a very concrete sexual sense. Can also symbolize the fit between two people or between the masculine and feminine side, or of an individual. In some cultures, the shoe was the gift of a husband to the wife at the wedding. Anne and Barry Ulinoff, in their excellent book, Cinderella and Her Sisters, The Envied and the Envying, point out how unique an individual a shoe is. Just think about that. You buy a new pair of shoes, you got to break them in. Takes a while before they fit exactly. This corresponds to our unique and individual character as we imagine our Cinderella is, becoming anyway. It requires a unique male character to fill the shoe. Best imagined in Jungian terms as a Jungian woman's animus being her unique image of her soulmate, her soul, and vice versa for the man. The sexual image of the foot in the shoe must be imagined in its most physical and erotic dimension and in the symbolic sense of the union of opposites. And this was Jung's one of his main critiques of Freud. In Memories, Dreams, Reflections, in the chapter on Freud, Jung said, sex is just as important to me as it was for Freud, but that Freud missed the symbolic dimensions of sexual union. So Cinderella's shoe was small and dainty. How feminine can you get? Golden, in other words, of ultimate value, and from her left foot, the entree into the unconscious complex. So to continue the fairy tale, now feel your way into what is happening here. It's kind of gruesome, but feel what it would like if this were happening to you, especially if you're a woman. So the next morning, he, the prince, went with it to the father and said to him, no one shall be my wife, but whose foot fits the golden slipper. Then there were two sisters, glad, for they had pretty feet. The eldest went with the shoe into the room and wanted to try it on, and her mother stood by. But she could not get her big toe into it. The shoe was too small for her. Then her mother gave her a knife and said, cut the toe off. When you're queen, you will no more need to go on foot. The maiden cut the toe off, forced the foot, into the shoe, swallowed the pain, and went out to the king's son. Then he took her on his horse as his bride and rode away with her. They were obliged, however, to pass the grave, and there on the hazel tree sat the two pigeons and cried, turn and peep, turn and peep. There's blood within the shoe. The shoe is too small for her. The true bride waits for you. Boy, that's such a powerful paragraph. I get a little emotional reading it. So the shoe is associated with the feet and hence one's standpoint in life. The great power of feet may explain why there were so many spots where the footprints of the devil, heroes, and so on had been left in stone. It is the mother who orders the daughter's toe to be cut off. Within an individual psyche, that's the internalized superego brutality towards the feminine by the feminine. The mother is willing to sacrifice the connection with the earth that the shoe implies. Hexagram 2, the archetypal feminine. Sacrifice that for the riches and powers that she associates with the powers of being the queen. This is the gestalt of the rich man married to the sick wife, with riches and power as a substitute for the genuine feminine. The toe is associated with direction, a person's way of life. The De Vries Symbol Dictionary says that the great toe great toes of the Levites in the Bibles were anointed. And the big toe is about having a sense of autonomy in relationships to collective pressures. Oh, I'm sorry. I read that wrong. It's associated with intuition and the head. And putting then all of these associations together, it's about having a sense of autonomy in relationship to collective pressures. What Jung was so focused on, the individuation process. Stepmom brutally sacrifices all this for what she thought would happen with her daughter if she became queen. As Asper points out, there are situations in life where we squeeze ourselves into situations, partnerships, bargains, and so on, but we die within if too much energy goes into prestige, persona, facade, and image. We saw this motif in one of my favorite movies, the Academy Award winning film Titanic. Remember that scene where the mother was tightening the daughter's corset because the daughter was beginning to doubt her engagement to a wealthy man while falling in love with the poor stowaway in steerage. The scene indicates what these archetypes are life in modern life. And I still remember that scene, and it made me appreciate these corsets and things that women wore at a time in our Western history when women had to have these small waists, and no wonder they passed out so often because they could hardly breathe. No wonder they fainted so much, and why so many women came into Freud's practice in Vienna in the Victorian culture period. So again, we have the two pigeons coming from the emerging feminine, anchored in the archetypal feminine earth of hexagram 2. That's when the prince had to go by that tree that these birds were in. So they are enlightening the masculine, the prince, raising his consciousness. So it is only after Cinderella has strengthened her consciousness with the positive, nurturing feminine that the prince is attracted to her and is now being educated by the same source that has guided Cinderella. In English, we have a saying, a little bird told me. This is related to the divination from the flight of birds. Apollo was one of the people that did that. It's psychologically related to the intuitive function. So the masculine is becoming aware of the pain in the feminine realm, but is still unaware of his role in causing it. We are introduced to the true bride, false bride motif in fairy tales. The false bride is within the gestalt of the negative mother and the witch in this tale. Is not aware of the pain associated with the persona, adopting the collective values of the culture. That's what we started the tale with. Next we read, then she looked at her foot and saw how the blood, he looked at her foot and saw how blood was trickling from it. He turned the source around and took the false bride home again and said she was not the true one, and the other sister was to put the shoe on. Then this one went into her chamber and got her toes safely into the shoe, but her heel was too large. So her mother gave her a knife and said, cut a bit off your heel. When you're queen, you no longer have need to go on foot. The maiden cut a bit off her heel, forced her foot into the shoe, swallowed the pain, and went out to the king's son. He took her on his horse as his bride and rode a raid with her. But when they passed the hazel tree, the two little pigeons sat on it and cried out, turn and peep, there's blood within the shoe. The shoe is too small for her, the true bride waits for you. So the prince has to be reminded by two pigeons there is blood in the shoe and that the true bride waits for you. In myth, the grasping of the heel of another person is a way of claiming power over them or extracting power from them. The heel is related to the abdomen and the uterus. At its deepest, most archetypal level, this is about damage to Lao Tzu's great mother as the source of the 10,000 things. In Jungian terms, the fecund realm of the unconscious. As a fractal of an archetype, this is the damage our species is doing to our planet, to Mother Earth. The story continues. He looked down at her foot and saw how blood was running out of her shoe and how it had stained her white stocking quite red. Then he turned his horse and took the false bride home again. That also is not the right one, said he. Have you no other daughter? No, said the man. There's still a little stunted kitchen wench, which my late wife left behind her, but she cannot possibly be the bride. The king's son said he was to send her up to him. But the mother answered, oh no, she's much too dirty. She cannot show herself. But he absolutely insisted upon it, and Cinderella had to be called. She first washed her hands and face clean, and then went down and bowed before the king's son, and gave her the golden shoe. Then she seated herself on a stool, drew her foot out of the heavy wooden shoe, and put it into the slipper, which fitted like a glove. And when she rose up, and the king's son looked at her face, he recognized the beautiful maiden who had danced with him and cried, this is the true bride. The stepmother and the two sisters were horrified and became pale with rage. He, however, took Cinderella on his horse and rode away with her. As they passed by the hazel tree, the two white doves cried, turn and peep, turn and peep. No blood is in the shoe. The shoe is not too small for her. The true bride rides with you. And when they had cried that, the two came down and placed themselves on Cinderella's shoulder, one on her right, the other on the left, and remained sitting there. So the gestalt is of the father and stepmother maintaining their degrading attitude towards Cinderella, but the greater power of the prince as the emerging new dominant masculine in the higher realm of the archetype in the realm of a healthy natural feminine that shows strong intentionality and direction, those toes and everything. Now, Cinderella first washed her hands and face clean, and then went and bowed before the king, who gave her the golden shoe. Cinderella washing herself shows that she is ready to present herself, outgrow her darkness and negativity of being in the ashes, and reveal the full beauty of her inner self, an inner light symbolically signaled by the candle on the mantle after the first ball. And she's not dressed now, right? She's just washed herself. She's still in those dirty garments. She doesn't have the persona of the beautiful dresses and gowns that can cover up this inner darkness. What is important? There's that candle. So this was an unconscious choice that began in the unconscious realm with the birds choosing between the good and the bad seeds. The prince had to see and recognize her in her humble and modest state to be aware of the difficult psychological background she had emerged from. In many fairy tales, the heroine must be recognized by her tutor in her mundane, degraded state. Cinderella seems to be innately aware that if she is recognized only in her beauteous state, she would never escape certitude. I think that was the danger she barely escaped by fleeing the pigeon house and the pear tree before they were chopped up by her father. Cinderella discarded her heavy wooden shoe, a symbol of the wooden step of depression and the poverty of feelings. This would be the alchemical transmuting of lead into gold. Cinderella was able to show her true self because she had the protection of the alchemical and therapeutic container of the archetypal masculine, the symbol of the prince as the king and the ruling force in the new kingdom, and as the representative of God on earth, the king as an embodiment or representative on earth of the divine. So Anne Ulanoff in Cinderella and Her Sisters commented that the perfect fit of Cinderella to her shoe and the sexual symbolism of the shoe as the vulva in the relationship to the masculine phallus inserted into it is that a woman must establish a personal relationship to her sexual organ and sexuality. I relate this archetypally to the movie Barbie. So the sequel to that movie would begin with the ending of it, where Barbie was checking in with her gynecologist. So the prince gets confirmation from the self in the form of the message from the two white doves that this is the true bride, his soulmate, a feminine that has emerged out from under the oppressive domain of excessive old young energy, the opening sentence of a rich father married to a sick wife, as part of the old king's kingdom. The two birds are no longer autonomous elements in the archetypal domain, but being on Cinderella's shoulders, they are now close to human consciousness, can whisper in her ear, and give her an ability to consciously discriminate what is good and bad for her well-being. The gods and goddesses always had animal consorts. So in the last paragraph, we read, when the wedding with the king's son was to be celebrated, the two false sisters came and wanted to get into favor with Cinderella and share her good fortune. When the betrothed couple went to the church, the elder was at the right side and the younger at the left, and the pigeons pecked out one eye from each of them. Afterwards, as they came back, the elder was on the left, the younger at the right, and then the pigeons pecked out the other eye from each. And thus, for their wickedness and falsehood, they were punished with blindness all their lives. What a happy end to this fairy tale. So, what's going on here? In folklore, there are amulets that provide protection against the evil eye, usually associated with malice, envy, etc. The aggressive pecking and directed activity of the birds, first seen in sorting out the good seeds from the bad, now comes to Cinderella's defense by blinding the eyes of the envious, rageful, unrepentant stepsisters that can be seen as inner figures. Cinderella had been a pretty defenseless character. Psychologically, this is an aggressive putting an end to an inner tortured way of seeing oneself in a denigrating way and diminishing one's place in the world. The baleful gaze can come from one's family, the expectations of a society, and old beliefs about oneself, and especially for women, their place in the patriarchal society. In real life, it takes a while to depotentiate a negative complex you have lived with for so long. The fairy tale illustrates the extraction of gold from the dung by the positive narcissism of displaying one's true inner self after you have come in touch with it and embodied it, thus integrating the aspects that were in the negative form in the stepsisters. We saw 3 sets of threeness in this tale. 3 wishes: for father to bring something back from the fair, then 2 wishes to go to the ball, 3 appearances at the ball, and 3 shoe fittings. So Osper comments that Cinderella is a story about, quote, outgrowing tremendous negativity toward oneself and growing toward a more positive outlook on life, end of quote. It takes tremendous emotional work to deal with the hardships involved in such a journey. It takes gold and silver, yang and yin, for the process. As Osper puts it, if there is no feminine energy, people do not have an inner secure base and cannot display their masculine potentials. The masculine energy is active, a disruptor, and helps discern what is good and what is not. So that ends my presentation on the Grimms, and I really want us to have enough time to get into questions and critiques and so on. It's a very important complement of this, and the psychological dimensions are presented in Grimm's Cinderella. Charles Perrault Cinderella, or the Little Glass Slipper, that was published in France in 1695, and Disney made several modifications for his 1950 film. So there's the glass slipper. I'll just post this, and this is being recorded. If you're interested in this, you can read it later on. There's slide 1. There is slide 2. And that covers that part. And then to close then, this wonderful book, Cinderella and Her Sisters, The Envy and the Envied. So some last comments then are, I'll take from the book. So envy, just briefly, is about not recognizing the good aspects of ourselves. We project the good onto others and then resent them for having something good that we don't think that we have. The stepsisters sold them out to the masculine realm, but at one level, they resented themselves for reducing and punishing themselves in this way. They found someone in the environment to punish who they could perceive to be having that good. So that's what happened with Cinderella. The alchemical process of extracting the gold from the dung is to withdraw projections. That good that we're seeing in others, withdraw that projection because it's coming from ourselves, seeing it in ourselves as something that is undeveloped and in nascent form. So we should ask ourselves about the people that we are envious of and persecuting, withdraw that projection, see the good in them, honor that, and that'll cultivate to act on that so that we're not lazy about it and are not courageous enough to bring out that in ourselves and develop those inner truths. And in doing that and recognizing the good in others, they will reciprocally start to relate to us in a better manner. So Osper, being a theologian and a Jungian and I think Union Theological Seminary in New York, saw Cinderella as a feminine Christ. And one way she talked about a relationship of a human to the divine good and love, if you will, is to experience that love from the divine is what she meant by grace. I like that definition of grace. And what I do when I see big dreams in my analyses, I try not to get too excited. But as a Jungian analyst, it's important to realize that, wow, there is something of symbolic significance there. This is something that can send your life in a different direction. It can even be an archetypal base for the rest of your life. And I tell my analysans to be thankful for such a dream, to whoever you're thankful for, to God, Jesus, Buddha, Muhammad, whatever, be thankful for that gift that comes from where? That's a gift from the unconscious. So that's all, folks. There's a symbol for envy. We're going to see that again. It's a pretty ugly thing to live with. I have a lot of articles on my blog about Jung and the environment, guns in the American psyche, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Eco Jung doesn't, my website has my article on use of the I Ching in the analytic setting. And if you have some questions, some deeper questions we don't cover today, there's my email address. So on that happy note, I will stop sharing. Wow, 20 to the hour. And that'll give us at least 20 minutes. For those of you that may have survived this, I particularly like this part. I put out a lot of material, but so important for a presenter to see how this stuff goes over and what you don't quite understand. Like I said, this is my experience of the best training I had to work in this classic Jungian way. So ask me whatever questions you want to.
Wow, that was so incredibly thorough, really impressive. I'm so glad we're recording it because I think a lot of people are going to want to go through it again. I've already gotten some messages from people asking, is it being recorded?
Well, I gotta confess, Judy, it's one of them. I'm 81, and my stage of my life, I like to have these things recorded. You just don't want to keep repeating them to a limited audience. It's one of the positive things that came out of the pandemic.
Right.
You know, so many people went to Zoom. You guys went international, you know? And like I said, I personally feel that Jungian ecopsychology is a framework for the future for young people dealing with the environment. So I'm really pleased that it's recorded too. So shall we have some questions here?
Yeah, I just want to mention, in case people didn't hear me at the beginning, so we do have a YouTube channel, and that's where the recording will appear, and it'll be linked to from the past programs page of our website. So yes, so first we have Nader Hagani.
Yes. Thank you for giving me a chance to ask a question. And what a wealth you shared with us. And be grateful to you for your wisdom. My question, you mentioned, I've got too many questions, but I summarized them very briefly so others can get a chance to ask. You mentioned big dream versus regular dream. We have a lot of regular dreams. How would you distinguish between those archetypal dreams versus just a dream?
Oh, great question. I'm so glad you asked that one. With the dreamer, you have a sense of it. It's probably a dream you would like to share with other people. And in Jungian terms, it's Jung picked up something from Otto Rank, a German theologian. It's called a numinous dream. So if something just really feels special in the dream, a person behaving in a way almost like a god or a goddess, or an animal behaving in a unique way, or even speaking to you. Those are those are those aren't everyday type dreams. They're different from the run-of-the-mill dreams. Most of our dreams are run-of-the-mill. The only time you have like archetypal dreams all the time is really with really severe mental conditions like schizophrenia. But for most people, those dreams are, it's kind of like mountaintop experiences. You can't live on a mountaintop, but you need to have some vision, some arching vision, some objectivity on your life and so on. That's what big dreams are about. And and like I said, the Jungian training, I think your most important training as an analyst is to realize those dreams, because big dreams or elements in the dreams are the archetypal elements. And that's why you have to know about how to work archetypally and link people to fairy tales and spirit animals and that kind of stuff. That's your role as a Jungian analyst, to be able to pick up on that stuff and tell people how to work with it so they can embody those big dreams.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And then very quickly, if I may ask, we have, you mentioned time and space. I relate to timelessness being actually in the collective. Is there such a thing called no space at all? It could be no time, but could there also be no space?
Oh yeah, that's what Jung meant about synchronicity. And when you talk
Okay.
about time and space and the collective, no, my most succinct summaries, I'm really big on Jung's idea, the layers of the collective unconscious. My most succinct summary of that, if you go into my Jungian ecopsychology, my blog, and pick up on the Canadian ecopsychology voices in Canada. And that's where I talked about the layers of the collective unconscious in a non-mystical way. It's very simple. Like there's a cultural unconscious. The American unconscious has a layer different from the European unconscious, right? Our myth of the cowboy and our Pollyanna, that's not European, you know? And then there's the Western unconscious that's different from the Eastern. Those aren't mystical things, but the dimension that is different, and this is where Jung gets put in the mystical category and by academics and dismissed. He talked about synchronicity. And Jung said that synchronicity shows there's a dimension of psychic experience that is outside of space and time. All right. So if you dream that your grandmother died, if you dream you wake up at 2:15 in the morning and your grandmother's at the foot of your bed, and the next morning you find out at 2:15, 1,000 miles away, she died, that shows there's something in the psyche that ties into that is outside of distance, outside of space. And if you dream of something in the future, and Jungians have all these stories because they honor these things about something that's going to happen in the future, that shows there's something in its psyche that's outside of time. And personally, I think when we talk about archetypes and about life after death or whatever, I think that's what happens to our soul at death as we go into that timeless, spaceless realm. But that's another story and another lecture.
And I look forward to watching and hearing that. Thank you again, sir.
I got a lot of stuff on my blog, so I'll keep it going for a while.
By all means.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Paula St. Marie.
Whoa, I got out.
What?
Oh, I like all your photos.
I think I got out.
No,
I don't know
you're
what you're
there.
seeing, but
We can see
anyway.
you.
We're seeing you with
Oh,
in
can
your
you?
room.
I
It's
can't
all-
see anybody.
It's all
So
good. It's all good.
two questions. So one was the first part where the mother tells her to be good and pure or something like that.
Pious. Yep.
Pious, yeah.
Yep.
And the other day I heard somebody say, a man, an older person say, well, she's such a sweet girl. And I thought, what does that mean exactly? And I kind of asked, and it was that she wasn't confrontational was the outcome of how she was experienced as sweet. But which I think is a real challenge, how to keep your own sweetness and still not be confrontationally baited like in the culture. I still think it's a difficult thing to do. To not let the thing steal your own inner kind of more peace than sweetness, I think. And that's one point about being sweet. And then the other one was the father chops down the pigeon house. And I experienced that as it was a brutal act. He wasn't trying to save her from falling into a role. He was trying to destroy her and her sexuality, I felt. But by that really heartful action, she knew she needed to save herself in some way. So those are my 2 points.
Oh, yeah. No, that bit about sweet. Yep, that's a big thing.
Mhm.
Uh, I must confess as a man, I would kind of hate to be a woman. Just the things that culturally they have to go through and so on. But being sweet, yep. It's definitely a way of trying to constrict women. And it's something culturally that I, as a northerner, have some trouble with the southern sweetness and the southern belle, and so on and so on. And it can hide a lot of stuff. They called Rosemary Carter this iron steel magnolia or something.
Right,
Uh,
right. Yeah.
you can be firm as long as you come ultimately from a position of love and respect for the sacredness in the other person. You can be firm, but you have to be connected with your sense of your inner nature and your uniqueness, because then you're much less likely to be taken by, oh, you're sweet. You're much less likely to be thrown off base by that, and just to keep putting it to them. And also, women might have to just go through a badass period when they let their anger out. You have to at some point come out, get in touch with how much rage is down there,
Yeah, I do think that.
and have to work with that first. It's difficult if you're letting that out in front of other people, but you have to work with that and kind of transmute that down to assertiveness, to be firm and assertiveness and so on. That's what that rage can lead to.
I think you have to, yes, I do. That does happen. And to know when you're feeling it and to
Yep.
know when you need to, for myself, be by myself, because I'm not going to be able to control this one,
Oh,
because it's like fire, right? So, and then to go and then get your balance again is a thing I feel. Yeah.
yeah. It's another way of is like somebody touches your complex, and it's like what count to 10 before you say anything. When
Right.
you're in that complex or whatever, it's like you say a person is beside themselves. Well, who's
Right.
there and where do they go? And
Right.
that when you're in a complex, you've lost consciousness, you've lost the ability to relate to other people and so on. You're being driven. So you're on autopilot, and that's where you got to work to do. And that's what therapy is about. In therapy, that's where you can bring these things out and talk about them and process them and practice a little bit in relationship to the therapist. Just
Yeah.
as an aside, therapy is an absolute necessity in our modern world. But you had this other thing about chopping the tree down. Yeah, to me, and that's not in the Cinderella's Walt Disney version.
Right. Right.
That's
That was
not in there,
yeah.
So that brutal aspect of of what it's like to be a female in a patriarchal culture.
Mhm.
That doesn't come out in Disney and the Perrault versions.
Right.
And in those versions, especially in Perrault, the mother's like a saint. She was the sweetest thing ever. So there's that sweetness that comes in.
Mhm.
But that's just a cover for the woundedness that's within.
Thank you. It was a great talk. Appreciate it.
Oh, well, thank you. It took a lot of work.
It's wonderful. Thank you.
Cindera Quackenbush, go ahead.
That's right. Yeah, so much wisdom here, and the work you put into this is just very intuitive and well researched of mythology throughout the world. So I want to thank you so much for that. So I have a question about your process with fairy tales in general. You had mentioned looking up every symbol in the tale, and you also talked about the 2 million-year-old man or person that lives within us. So I'm very curious, if we have all of that within us, is there a moment, does it occur throughout the process, or before you reach for those books, before you reach for those books of symbolism, are you reacting to the tale do you have a moment where you can just kind of be with the tale and see what's coming up before you do that research, and can listen and compare before you deepen into these books and things that other people have put out there? Or does that come later or throughout the process?
That's a great question. And it is one of the problems Jungians can run into, because especially we more traditionalists, it's so easy to go to the symbolic part. You always start with dreams, with fairy tales, with your immediate responses. And you always start, this is so important, by trying to feel your way into it. Like, quite frankly, for me, when I was reviewing the notes before the lecture and when I was delivering it, practicing what I'm preaching here, it was quite emotional for me to read those parts about what the father did, with the pigeon house and cutting off. It's like, wow, this is a metaphoric statement to psychologically what it feels like to be women in those situations. I mean, that's really painful stuff. So you get those responses, and then you go to the personal responses. Well, what's your association to pigeons? Or, you get those responses. And they can be better. An easier example is like, whoa.
Just went dead there. An easier example is like somebody who dreams about a dog. Well, some people have been bitten by dogs when they were kids, so they're afraid of dogs. Many African Americans aren't too fond of German Shepherds because of the way they were used in the South, during the racial situations. But on the other hand, you have a heck of a lot of people that are dog lovers, so their dog could have been their best friend. So those personal associations are really important. The other aspect that's so important is that where I said everything qualifies everything else. So let's say you dreamt about a black dog. Again, you get with the personal association. Well, my dog Frodo was black. So personally, there may be very powerful positive associations. But they could have also been bitten by a black dog and be negative. Then you go to the cultural, and you go down level by level. So if an American dreams of a White House, that can mean a lot more to us, especially now, unfortunately, than in a European dream about a White House. And then you go to the more collective level in symbol dictionaries. But if you go to the symbol dictionaries too soon, then you can zap everything up to that more kind of abstracted spiritual realm and so on. And just like Cinderella, trying to be good and pious on our mothers, you lose the connection with the body and being fully embodied and the dark side of stuff. So great question. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Harry Shaban, go ahead.
Yes. Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much. It was a great presentation. And well, you mentioned about the glass shoe. And when the prince got it, was looking for the person who would fit that glass. Kind of it points to the to the uniqueness of Cinderella. Kind of is he tried to mirror her uniqueness and her self-worth. But as you said, there are variations in these fairy tales, and in real life you'll see variations also, where it's not as straightforward. It's very complex, where you see a woman, for example, she has this mother complex, but also the actual father is like the stepmother who made her feel bad, ugly, unwanted, and repulsive, and then you see how that hinders her connection with that masculine, with that inner prince, to mirror her. You see what I mean? So these are kind of layers and variations of the fairy tale that you sometimes see. So that person acts so identified with that stepmother or the father, basically, who put her down, devalued her, that she starts belittling others, very harsh way of talking to others, and then she would say, I like myself the way I am. It's like so identified. So I would like to know your opinion about such cases.
Okay, there are three different things there.
Let me just interrupt for a second.
Oh.
We are at the 3-hour mark, and so Dennis has told me he could stay so we can continue with the Q&A, but of course, if people need to leave, and if you're getting CEs and you've been on till now, you're certainly free to leave.
Thank you for the great mother there, keeping the time. We need somebody like you, Judy, especially Jungians. Okay, so to your question, yeah. In a broader sense, what you the first part of your question, well, wait a minute there. Thoughts come, and then being intuitive thinking type, more thoughts come. The first thing is difference between the glass slipper as an example of different presentations and the golden slipper. The glass slipper is really the Perrault-Disney version, and quite frankly, I hadn't thought about that a lot about that, but just to illustrate the process. So glass would be something that would be transparent. So when you think of it, it would be a little easier to see that, yes, this is indeed fitting. And you could even see blood in there before it might overflow, and come out. You see how you play around with this stuff?
Yes.
But glass could also be something that might be a little more brittle. As such, it might not be quite as evolved as the Grimm tale, because to me, that's not a complete. The Grimm's and the Perrault version is not a complete tale. If anything is too perfect, that's too much in the archetypal or the hexagram one. It's not embodied, and you see it in the Bible, where Yahweh's helpmeet came out, I think, about the time of answer to Job, as Sophia. So it's the feminine and the messiness of actually trying to bring the spirit into the world. And that messiness to me was missed in the Perrault-Disney version. The other aspect was that's why we have to be careful, and especially the feminists and so on, help us realize this more, that you don't want to literally connect masculine and feminine with the more generic archetypal yin and yang. All right, because you can have the mothering energy, if you will, the yin coming from a really good father. And you could have a fathering energy come from a woman. I think there are a lot of modern women that really have it together, and about direction and purpose and work and dedication and so on. So you see what I mean? What the next level that's important there, you can see I just keep going with this stuff and free associating in a way, but is the next level is seeing, I lost my train of thought and saying, oh, the next level is, and I think it's really important now. I work with a lot of men, and I'm very concerned. We saw it come up in the last election, how many young men have checked out and how many have voted for Trump. I'm very concerned about where young men in our culture are, and they don't know how to relate to the feminine. They don't know what their masculine energy is. And I will be addressing that. I've been invited to the men's conference in Minnesota to present this fall. This is the ongoing Bly thing. Bly wrote Iron John. And the complementary fairy tale that I do for Cinderella is Iron Hearts. And in that fairy tale, the masculine is inhibited and therefore goes to the dark, deadly side, is inhibited by the feminine. So that's the part 2, and then part 3. Yes, the other part was the harsh side, about projection. In psychology, we call that projective identification. Melanie Klein talks so well about that. You project the bad stuff out there so you can feel good. And that's that split in the psyche, but it's not a holistic psyche. And that's so much of what we see happening. There are 2 elements of no envy. I guess I didn't know that. Yeah, that was another. I want to contaminate that. And then the difference between the glass and the gold slipper, coming back to Dan again. The gold, I thought, was so beautifully and fit in so well with the whole storyline, as that is what is always considered the ultimate value. And if you're very familiar with, I covered this in my talk on I Ching, the Orange County Jung, and I think that comes back to one of the first things out of the Tao is it's all white. And then you get the black and the white, the yin and yang and so on. But I suspect that like coming out is all white, but it's like many people near-death experience. That's just going the other end, that overwhelming light that a lot of people have in near-death experiences. So I tried to cover several archetypal bases there.
Yeah, thank you
Thanks
so
for the
much. Thank
question.
you. Thank you.
Next, we have William Ikuri.
Thank you. Hi, Dr.
Hi,
Merritt.
William. I recognize you.
Yeah, good to see you. I had a question. I was curious to ask a little. You referred to the I Ching and several hexagrams from the I Ching, and this has just been a question I've been pondering for a while. Do you believe that you could find all 64 hexagrams in any fairy tale or in any storyline of a fairy tale? But you highlighted, for example, 22 Grace, the Turning Point, 1 and 2. But what about all do you think all hexagrams could be found, or is it really just sort of not cherry picking necessarily, but certain ones stand out or are highlighted more than others?
I got to tell you, William is not a plant. I had to boil down. See, I gave these lectures in China, but they were 5 hours in English, but 10 total, 10 total hours because everything was translated into Chinese. And one of the things I had to cut to get it down from 5 hours to 3 hours for today was when I talked about how to work with fairy tales. I cut out that part where von Franz said that every archetype, every fairy tale presents a different archetype, different part of the self. If you think of the self as a conglomeration, as an ecosystem, if you think of like every archetype as being an animal in nature, then it's how all those animals interrelate. So if you're looking more at the bear archetype, if you will, then most of your stuff will be about bear energy, or it could be bear in combination with tuna, or not tuna, but salmon energy, and so on and so on. So every fairy tale presents like a different element, or different archetypes, or combination of archetypes, but you don't have any one fairy tale presenting the whole thing. So that would be my response to that. So this fairy tale then was dealing with the archetype of a very fundamental thing, and that's why it's so universal, namely the archetype of love for human beings. But I like to tell my analysans, being an entomologist, is that a grasshopper does not need love. There's eros there, but it is not in the form of love. Female lays the eggs on the ground, she disappears. Baby grasshoppers don't need mothers, but humans do. So even in that broader sense, there are different archetypal realms within the world of animals. Does that kind of answer your question? And
No, that does.
there's no what you get when you ask the Jing a question is like what archetypal constellation is alive most at the moment, and where we see that in our Western cultural roots is that it was important for the ancient Greeks to know what god or goddess was alive in the moment, to be able to call out the name of that god or goddess, or maybe what myth was active, because a myth is about how the gods and goddesses interact, right? So to be able to call that out, that means that you are conscious of what the archetypal dynamics are in the moment. For an English major, which Marion Woodman was, and that's why the title of her first book, that was her thesis in Zurich, The Owl Was a Baker's Daughter, that was right out of course, of a Hamlet, after he drove Ophelia, his girlfriend, insane. And one of the things she said while she was insane, the owl was a baker's daughter. So an English major, Shakespeare was such a genius. So it would be easier for an English major to say, oh, this is where you are in a particular play by Shakespeare, for example, from our Western cultural tradition, of this very motif of archetypally how it would be related to the Chinese.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks for the question.
And the last one, unless somebody suddenly raises their hand, is Michael Whitney.
Yes, thank you so much. Is my audio working here? Yeah. Thank you so much. This has been a tremendously deep and multifaceted, and I love your reverting to the insects, not needing a mother, not needing love. I was very deeply struck at the beginning of your talk when you mentioned Alice Miller, because as a young person in my early 20s, I was deeply impacted by her idea in Drama of the Gifted Child, of the idea of a true self. And my question is really based on my own sense of pain, because I read fairly recently Martin Miller, her son's book, The True Drama of the Gifted Child. Are you familiar with the book?
No.
So he points out it's been, I'm seeking some solace in a broader understanding of it, but in drama, in Martin Miller's book, he points out that his mother, as Jewish, was able to so suppress her Jewishness that the young German kids who were looking for Jews wouldn't spot it in her face.
Mm.
And Martin Miller, her son, is actually a therapist himself who struggled for 18 years to write about it, because apparently she married her German tormentor. And what I'm trying to understand is, it seems that as she describes it, she, as a Jewish person, went off to France, left Switzerland, and wouldn't allow her son to follow a Jewish tradition, which is to be with somebody in their death. And there's actually that emotional journey that in the Jewish literature comes out, that it's in respecting the death of your mother that you help her soul move on its way. So I tried through that to see how that could be understood in terms of this apparent inability of her to be her true self, because it was life-threatening. And perhaps what I came to by listening to you today is that maybe she left him the gift that he was able to write the book and come and heal himself perhaps from this. I know this is a very tangential question, but the emotion of it has been so deep, and you've touched so many aspects.
Wow. Love the question, and can imagine I have several responses, but I'll try to limit myself to them. Yeah, that the Jews are so unique in the West, and it's so unique in Jungian psychology. Jung, one of the reasons he hasn't been recognized so much in academia is because because of what happened in Germany. So many Jews came to America, and Germany was a cultural and academic center of the world, right before the war. And a lot of those great academics came to America, and because of what happened is very complex. I don't want to go into detail, but you can see it as an example of Jung's blind side because of his cultural heritage, his cultural tradition. So it's important. That cultural layer of the collective unconscious is really important. And the Jews are at such a fundamentally important level in the West because of Christianity, right? And it wasn't until there was a wonderful program on PBS, and I'll try to limit myself here, but it's been such a important and intriguing issue. A wonderful program on PBS about Heschel, Abraham Heschel, all right? And he was a big supporter. He was on the front lines with Martin Luther King, for example. And he was the one who went to the Vatican when they were doing the Vatican whatever numbers, and really told them that that this Catholic idea that the Jews are the one who put Jesus to death, and that the Catholic dogma or whatever was to convert the Jews to Christianity. And Heschel made the point that we have a valid and a deep and a rich historical position. It's different from years, and to talk about Christianizing us is really an insult, really. And so they went along with that, but then the Pope died and they had another council, and Heschel had to go back again. And they finally got rid of that. So it's this deep. When you get distortions at the spiritual level in the Jungian world, that's the biggest distortions you can have. And the most deadly distortions are fundamentalism in any religion, whether you're talking about Judaism, evangelicals in their worst form, even the Hindus. Look at Modi in India. You know, everything can be driven to the extreme. And that's why Jung was so great. I really liked his answer to Job and talking about that the perfectionism is the enemy of the good. I thought he did. And my volume 1 Dairy Farmer's Guide to the Universe, I really wanted to wrap my mind around his answer to Job. And I think I did a pretty good job with that. But And Jung realized how important it was for the Jewish analyses he had to get in touch with their Jewish heritage, because it's not just what people say or do, but there's a way of embodying those things, and especially for Jews. It's part of their tradition that we've been the one that have been shat upon, if you will. And Hillman talked about that. That's why Hillman, who was Jewish, talked about pathologizing and how his Jewish nature came out in his incredible work in the Jungian world. I call him the professional Jungian gadfly. So it's important, and the Jewish people that I work with, I don't work with too many of them, but I mean they're mostly totally acculturated, and I whenever I see it, I remind them, of their heritage, especially if they look really Jewish. Some people don't, but those that do, I say, you're going to be perceived in a certain way. It's going to be important for you to know what your base and your foundation is. Just as important in another dimension for Cinderella to find her base in archetypal feminine. And was there one more thing here? Oh, yes, yeah. Oh, I like that part. And I've just, as an introverted thinking type, you get these thoughts every once in a while, and it's like it opens up new dimensions of reflections. But I'm working with an analysis now. I will be so generic as possible in that it was about a horrible death with an extremely difficult father. That's all I can say about it. And so he's left holding the bag and his whole family dealing with this horrible situation. And what I told him is that there's no way, even if your father were still alive, it's highly unlikely that you would have been able to change your relationship with him. But I said, he's dead now, but he's living on in your psyche. But you can tell by the dreams you have. And the way we've been working with it, I say, yeah, and you can change that inner relationship. And there's some approaches I have on how dealing with that, but that's a little too much detail there. And the dreams have changed. And there have been openings in the psyche for him to one more time try to connect with him before his father does some terrible thing. And I said, that's something you can work with. And then you give them ideas on how you can work with it. And what I said is getting back to what I was an answer to another question about a part of the psyche is outside of space and time. In this Jungian conceptual system, I think it's indeed possible that if you can change the dynamics here in your psyche, you're going to change the dynamics in them. And Jung's, I'm glad I spent 18 years working on my Dairy Farmer's Guide to the Universe. Jung Hermes and ecopsychology, because I got a lot of the basics of Jung down. And there was that part in Jung where he talked about his father coming to him in a dream and wanting marriage counseling. So, okay, so you could look at it two ways. One is I can change the relationship to my parents and their marital problems, which was huge, as Donnie would say, huge in how it affected Jung's psychological development. But I think there's a possibility then that could change. Like, I don't like the idea of the afterlife. To me, it's more meaningful to think of that element of the psyche and human experience that is outside of space and time. So I think I'll stop with that, but thanks for the question.
We have one last quick one he's promised, but I'm going to intercept here. Getting back to Paula's thing about sweetness and tying it into the Jewish woman's psyche. I happen to be in about hour 7 of Barbara Streisand's 47-hour recording of her memoir, and she and I are both New York Jewish women, not just Jewish, New York Jewish women. And it comes through in her book, so important to her to be truthful. And therefore she really hated going on talk shows at night, especially beginning of her career. It was like, oh, this is great. They want you on talk shows. You should be so excited. But they always didn't want her to be truthful. And she gives an example where she sings her song and she sits down and immediately the interviewer says, so are you sugar and spice and everything nice? And she looks at him and she says, no, I am flesh and blood.
Yep, yep, yep. Now, one thing about, I think about Jungian psychology, I quite frankly can imagine a more a system, and I'm always open to hearing possibilities or augmentation and changing of some, but I can't imagine a system that can begin to better approach the complexity of the human psyche, and especially one human relating to another. So it is so important to see so for Jung, from his Christian base, to be able to relate to the Jews, and for Jung to look at Jung from the archetype of the dead mother or the wounded mother or the really weird and frightening mother that he talked about in the interview face to face. Jung didn't see it, but the system he developed, I think, is big enough we can analyze Jung with it. And to me, that's a sign of a good comprehensive system. Maybe one more question, Judy?
Yeah, we have one last, it's from
Okay.
Peter Hagani again, and he wrote me, it's a very short question, so we'll make this the very last one.
Okay.
Well, I'm grateful to you, Judy. Very briefly, first of all, your lecture is so inspiring that we can ask you questions all evening, but here is a very brief one. Would you say the 2 million years figure that you made mention of, he is combination of anima and animos, and he's the true storyteller, whether it is Jung or any other one of us?
Okay, great question. True storyteller. Yeah. Yes. Well, again, my biological side, our species, and I'm not an anthropologist, but from what I gather, we're about 300,000 years old, right? And at least 290,000 before the beginning of agriculture, we were tribal people and we were hunter-gatherers and we were storytellers and we didn't have the written language. That was the profound difference that came in Athens in our Western tradition. And that myth, as an aside, of Hermes stealing Apollo's cattle, that was about that point. And that's why I think those Greek myths are so rich and why Shakespeare is so rich, because it still brings in that sense of the tribal and the shaman and so on and magic and nature, which is what we have to have, a sacred sense of the nature going forward and dealing with the environment. So that's why the indigenous one within is so important. So storytellers, the way I think of it, the most significant thing that we have about ourselves is our life story, our life narrative. And that's become kind of a psychological popular thing. What's your narrative? But really, and that's what the dreams are doing every night. And if you look at it biologically, let's say the deep memory, there's our basic storyline. And what the dreams are doing with the hippocampus, they're sorting out all the activities and the things that happen during the day. And it's like, is this congruent with your basic storyline? Is there some conflict there or whatever? That's what I think is happening in the dream work at the neurobiological level. And ultimately it's a story that's going on. And then in terms of, now let me see your question. Yeah, the thing we have to be careful with, and this is what I'm going to be talking at the men's conference. I'm going to be talking about Barbie on one hand and how But the other story is a film called Men. And I saw a profound distortion in there. It basically was about what is the archetype of the green man in England. There are a lot of taverns named the Green Man. It's like the primordial indigenous masculine energy. But as that energy can get distorted, and I think the way the men came out so negatively in that movie Men is because there's a distortion at the root, that there's not a recognition of what archetypal masculine energy is. And that's a little tricky to talk about with the PC world and the feminists, but I think it's absolutely important. And that's what I'll be talking about at the men's conference. So thank you for your questions. I love your questions. As you
Thank
can
you so much.
see, it's
I appreciate it.
the presentation is a part of it, but then the interaction with people is just it's more interesting for me, quite frankly. So thanks again for your wonderful questions.
Well, thank you so much.
Well, they're both very, very interesting to all of us, and I really appreciate you staying on to do this much Q&A, and appreciate the many people who stayed on with you. This was just wonderful, just really amazing, amazingly thorough analysis of a fairy tale, and so appreciative. And come back again with another fairy tale. We would love
I love to
that.
do Iron Hearts. And I want to thank you, Judy, again, and for the Orange County Jung, and remind people to donate.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Okay, take care.
Okay, so bye everyone, and we hope to see you next month. What do we have next month? I forgot already. Ignacio Cunha on cannibalism in the Tupinamba. So that should be quite something. So bye everyone.